Yeah, or maybe before that, just to paint the broader picture and why and how this looks different across the globe. So we've got this big global mission of stopping and then reversing biodiversity loss. But the path to get there looks very different across countries and regions because the challenges aren't the same, right? Like a land scarce island nation doesn't have the same priorities as a country with loads of forest. So governments also vary in policy tools, economic structures, and political will. So some regions are turning commitments from the GBF into laws and regulation. Others are setting more voluntary schemes and targets with incentives and public-private collaboration, things like that. And then in others, the GBF commitments remain a bit of an aspiration, right? So the action plans that were submitted at the end of last year, there were some missing and there's still a bit of a lag. But just to maybe two different types of ways that countries and regions are making it real. Regulation we've spoken about with the EU and the UK. So the UK's BNG, Biodiversity Net Gain Scheme, the EU's reporting requirements. And then other examples are commitments to super large scale landscape conservation. So some call outs here, Sweden, Scotland, Singapore, South Africa, also doing really cool things. You know, Scotland's funding a lot of afforestation, Singapore, same for urban biodiversity. So they're focused on making Singapore this like green urban mecca. South Africa is prioritizing restoration of really large areas of degraded habitat. So that I hope also shows just the different ways that this is coming to life. And now we can go deep on the EU Pollinators Initiative if you want.
Yes, well, that's one of the ones, but that's one of the ones we prepared, so let's do it.
Cool. So this is just, yeah, one example of what an initiative like looks like in practice and how these big lofty goals become people's reality on the ground. So some context in the EU, pollinators are essential to food production. Around 80% of crops are directly dependent on animal pollination, yet the numbers, populations are declining. And this isn't just a biodiversity issue, like a nice to have, it's real and it's very economic. So nearly 4 billion euros of EU agricultural output depends directly on these pollinators. And so what the EU did is from the GBF framework, create this initiative in alignment with different targets. So GBF target 2 is about ecosystem restoration. So it's aligned with that. And then there's a target 4 about species recovery. So you can see how this all starts like plugging together. And practically how this initiative works is through a three-pronged approach. So the first is about improving knowledge. The second is around conserving and restoring habitats. And then the third is around mobilizing society. And so within these three blocks, there are policies popping up like incentives for farmers that adopt practices that benefit pollinators, or subsidizing moves away from harmful pesticides that are harming pollinators. We can get like super niche and technical, but that's the gist of how this stuff is coming together. And it's a nice example, right? Because it's getting at the themes that we've touched on. This initiative, it's helping value nature. So it's recognizing that pollinators are critical to economies and the food system. It's linking business and policy. And it's also engaging all stakeholders, from farmers to city planners, and showing how this change and this transition really happens at multiple levels. So it's an example, it's a bit of a test case, and there's a lot still to see how the GBF targets and framework gets mobilized in similar ways.